She had stood in the shadows of Alexander Kane's empire for years, her presence as constant as the ticking of a clock no one noticed, her sacrifices invisible against the blinding glare of his ambition, her heart silently breaking each time he dismissed her thoughts, overlooked her efforts, and praised others for achievements she had made possible. Yet tonight, as she stood by the grand windows of his towering office, the rain streaking the glass like the tears she had held back for years, she could sense a storm far fiercer than the one outside, a storm that would shake the foundation of everything she had silently endured. For the infamous Victor Harlow, the man whose name alone carried danger and desire in equal measure, had crossed the line, his presence a poisonous shadow over her life, insinuating himself into every conversation, every glance, every forced smile, and as Alexander's back was turned, speaking with his board members, Victor leaned close, whispered words dipped in charm yet dripping with threat, words meant to tempt, to test, to fracture the fragile peace she had clung to, and at that very moment, the weight of years spent in silent devotion collided with the fear of loss, igniting a fire in her chest that she could no longer hide, a fire that demanded recognition, demanded action, demanded that the man who had taken her heart for granted finally wake up to the truth she had carried alone for too long. And when Alexander finally noticed, when his eyes, sharp and calculating as always, fell on the scene, a cold, unyielding rage coursed through him. But it was not the kind born of pride or anger at being challenged. It was the jagged, painful, gut-wrenching awareness of how recklessly he had neglected the most precious part of his life, the realization that while he had built an empire, the one person who had given him love without conditions, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return, had been silently slipping through his fingers, and as he stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice steady but trembling with the weight of long-suppressed emotion, the world seemed to narrow into a single point, the space between him, Victor, and Elena, and in that narrowing, in the intensity of that instant, the years of neglect, of quiet heartbreak, of invisible devotion, struck him with the force of a hurricane, leaving him breathless, aware that every boardroom victory, every accolade, every deal he had celebrated, alone meant nothing without her by his side, and the truth, raw and painful, cut through him. He had ignored the cure for his own hollow heart for far too long, and now, staring at her, watching the subtle tremor in her hands, the glint of fear and longing in her eyes, he understood that losing her would be the greatest defeat he had ever known, far worse than any corporate loss, far more devastating than any scandal Victor could engineer. And in that moment, time seemed to freeze as Elena's gaze met his, carrying years of unspoken words, hurt, loyalty, and love that had never been returned. And she saw, in the intensity of his stare, the jagged edges of remorse, the raw desire to make amends, the aching awareness that he had been blind to her value, blind to the heartbeat that had kept his own life steady all these years, and as Victor's smirk faltered, as his audacious charm crumbled under the gravity of Alexander's presence, the boardroom, the rain, the storm outside, all faded into insignificance, leaving only the charged space between a man who had finally woken up and the woman he had long ignored. And with a trembling step, Alexander closed the distance, his hand reaching out to touch hers, not in possessiveness, not in pride, but in recognition, in a silent apology that words could never fully capture. And Elena felt the years of neglect, the invisible pain, the heartache, and finally, the acknowledgement she had craved, washing over her like the first warm rain after a long harsh winter, her chest aching, her tears threatening, yet mingled with relief, with hope, with a fragile but undeniable rekindling of trust. And when Alexander spoke, his voice breaking under the weight of emotion he had buried for so long, he said, "I should have seen you. I should have fought for you years ago. Let me prove I'm worthy of you now." And in that declaration, in that trembling confession, the boardroom, the storm, the threat of Victor Harlow, the years of invisibility, all dissolved, leaving only the fragile, powerful bond that had endured in silence, that had survived neglect, that had never wavered even when unnoticed. And as Elena allowed herself to step closer, their hands brushing, their eyes locking in mutual understanding, a silent promise forming in the charged air, Victor, the rival, realized too late that no charm, no manipulation, no audacious interference could ever compete with the depth of a love forged in loyalty, pain, and endurance. And in that moment, Alexander vowed, with a fierce intensity that left no room for doubt, that he would never take her for granted again, that he would fight every storm, every rival, every shadow that dared threaten the woman who had been the invisible foundation of his life. And Elena, feeling the long-awaited recognition, the heart-wrenching apology, and the raw, aching desire for her she had always deserved, finally allowed herself to let go of the years of sorrow, of quiet frustration, of unnoticed sacrifices, and in the silent embrace that followed, with the rain lashing against the windows and the world outside holding its breath, they both understood that the greatest battles were not fought in boardrooms, not won through deals or strategy, but in hearts, fragile, overlooked, and aching hearts that, when finally seen, acknowledged, and cherished, could heal even the deepest wounds. And as Alexander held her, promising through touch and gaze, through whispered words and trembling breaths, that he would never ignore her again, Elena realized that she had been the cure for his hollow existence all along, the one constant he had overlooked, and now, in the raw intensity of recognition, the heartbreak transformed into hope, the neglect into devotion, and the storm outside mirrored the storm inside, both cleansing, both fierce, both impossible to ignore, leaving no room for doubt that they had survived the worst, and now, perhaps for the first time, could truly embrace the best, together.